Thomas Jefferson, one of the founding fathers of the United States of America, once said, "The purpose of government is to enable the people of a nation to live in safety and happiness. Government exists for the interests of the governed, not the governors." Good evening and welcome. This is Vantage Point. Your host tonight, I am Shahin Jurampati, and our guest this evening, Dr. Dayan Jayatilaka, former diplomat and political analyst. Dr. Jayatilaka, welcome back to the show. It's an absolute pleasure.
Hi, Shahin.
Dr. Jayatilaka, it's been an interesting past couple of months, even up to date. We had an election. In your opinion, how do you assess the past couple of months and now?
Well, the good thing is that the period of frontal political confrontation seems to be over with the second election. There is an election coming up at the local level, the local authorities, but the clash of political armies on a conventional battlefield has now come to an end, so we can move on. It doesn't mean that political conflict or contradictions end, but it means that it's going to be far more fluid. It's going to be a situation of maneuver and balancing, multipolar balancing, rather than head-on clashes, and that's a good thing. How do I see the result the past few months? Well, we had in Sri Lanka a pendulum swing in the old days, where we changed governments every 5 years. Then that was arrested, that was stopped after 77, and it moved from a pendulum swing to a cycle with larger chunks of time taken by an incumbent government. You had 17 years of the UNP, centre-right. Then that changes and the cycle moves on, and you had now 20 years of the SLFP. So in a way what has happened is a natural change. But something interesting has happened in Sri Lanka. The usual movement of the cycle has, in a way, been interrupted. So instead of a 20-year period of SLFP reign, as it were, ending with a UNP, with a changeover to the UNP, you still have an SLFP president, Mr. Maithripala Sirisena, who was not SLFP when he contested, but he went back to being the leader of the SLFP afterwards. So it hasn't, the cycle has not caused such a changeover. You don't have a UNP president. You do have a UNP government, but you have an SLFP that had 95 seats, that still has 95 seats. So you have a limited defeat for the SLFP after 20 years with an unprecedentedly large opposition, 95, of which some would go over to the national government. And you have a limited victory for the UNP, which, despite a 20-year period, has been unable to get enough momentum to form a government on its own. So it's a minority government, which now has a majority because the SLFP leader, President Sirisena, has transferred or gifted or loaned some SLFP MPs to the UNP. So there is an anomaly in the situation, but that's a specificity that we are going to have to live with. That's something new in the Sri Lankan situation. But otherwise, it's the old turn of the cycle that you have in any democratic country. You had it in Britain, you had it in the US, long periods of Republican administration, center-right, replaced by a long period of center-left democratic administration, or a long period of conservative rule, replaced by a long period of Labour governance in Britain. That's fairly standard.
Yeah, Doctor, now with all the election process done and dusted, I suppose, where do you think the country can move forward from here on? And how?
Well, it will depend on what the Prime Minister wishes to do and what President Sirisena wishes to accommodate. Now, it can go the right way, it can go the wrong way. The right way is for government and opposition to always remember, realize and respect the actual balance of public opinion. And what was the actual balance as reflected in the election? Strong opposition, weak government. But now there is an artificial strengthening of the government because of this transfer of MPs. So what you see in Parliament is not the reality at the social level or the ground level. If those in power always remember that at the ground level the balance of public opinion is different, and if the government acts in accordance with that realization, then things will be fine. And we can move on towards the kind of post-war society that we should be. But if the government forgets that and thinks, look, we do have the numbers in Parliament, we have a national government, we have a near two-thirds majority, we can do anything we want. It's like somebody who fails to remember what his real income is and his real savings, and has, borrowed money from somebody else, which he would have to repay someday, and then lives it up instead of using it wisely. So, I don't know which way this government will go. I hope it will go in a realistic and pragmatic way.
Do you believe it's the right thing to do?
What?
The national government?
Well, no. I mean, even if it should have been done, it should have been done differently. I believe in the fundamentals of democracy, and that is that you have an elected government and you have an elected opposition which balances off the government and criticizes it and corrects it and helps it go on the right track. In democracies, there are very few occasions on which you have a national government, such as Britain during the war. And a national government, as in Britain during the war, is an all-parties government. It's not just the two big ones. So what you have here is a situation where you don't have that kind of national emergency. You should, in fact, respect the balance of public opinion, which is you have a limited government, a weak government, and a strong opposition. Instead, you have an artificial national government, in a way. And then, President Sirisena, I think, has done himself a disservice, because if he had stood back, he would have had the UNF with 106. He would have had the SLFP or the Sandhane, the alliance, with 95. And they would both have had to come to him. But now he's donated a chunk of SLFP MPs to the UNF government. And he's done it for free. He's done it for free. What I think he should have done if he were going in for this national government is to make sure that he retained, or his loyalists retained, crucial portfolios. And he has not done that. The crucial portfolios are, well, defense he has. But finance and foreign affairs should have been with his nominees, those who reflect his ideology. And that is not the case. We don't know who the finance minister is going to be. We do know that the foreign minister is Mr. Mangala Samaraweera, who is a UN per. So I think that President Sirisena has forfeited a brilliant chance to have been the balancing factor. He could have balanced these two.
No.
But he's donated a chunk of SLFP people to the UNP.
Now, will this move as by President Sirisena as chairman of the SLFP or UPFA cause internal issues within that party?
They were about to cause serious internal issues, but President Sirisena has very wisely hit the brakes. Now, when the SLFP Central Committee met with President Sirisena, it was a recomposed Central Committee with his loyalists inside. He had sacked many others. And it was a largely unelected body, people like President Kumaratunga and so on. It also had a large number of people who had been rejected by the electorate and the SLFP in the preference votes, Mr. S.P. Disanayak. And there was a very interesting clash over a very fundamental issue. MP Dallas Alha Peruma had pointed out that if the SLFP as a whole joined the national government, the role of the opposition would fall by default into the hands of the TNA.
I think that's what Mr. Udaya Gamampila said as well, I suppose.
Perhaps. Yeah. But, well, Udaya is not SLFP. Dallas Alha Peruma is very much an SLFP. And he is not known to be hostile to President Sirisena. So when he pointed this out, Mr. S.B. Dissanayake said that's perfectly okay. In fact, it should be the case that the TNA should be the leader of the opposition, should have the post of the leader of the opposition. So there was a huge clash looming. This spilled over into the parliamentary group meeting, where Dada Salaperuma brought this up again and said, I was shocked to hear this morning Mr. S.B. Dissanayake, or rather a senior member of our party, saying this, especially in view of the UN war crimes inquiry. It would be very bad for the country if the TNA, with its stated views, has the added advantage of leading the opposition. Now, what President Sirisena did was very smart after that. It took a few days, and I think he thought this through. And as of yesterday, or day before yesterday night, he met the SLFP people, and he said, okay, guys, those of you who want to sit in the opposition, you sit in the opposition. But try not to rock the boat too much. Try not to go head-on at this national government. Those of you who want to join the national government, join the national government. Both sides observe a ceasefire. But, okay, you can, those of you who want to, you can sit in the opposition. So, President Sirisena took a view that was different from that of Mr. S.B. Dissanayake, who was in all probability reflecting the views of somebody used to say nasty things about President Kumaratunga, because former President Kumaratunga was known to have been of the view that it's perfectly fine for the TNA to be the opposition and for the whole of the SLFP to go into the national government. And in fact, at the Central Committee meeting, she had said that those in the SLFP who criticize the national government should be sacked. President Sirisena has decided that that's not the way he's going. So he's allowed the SLFP, those who want to sit in opposition. The best way to do this would have been a vote in the SLFP parliamentary group, because then that's more democratic. But still, this is an improvement over what might have happened.
So, Doctor, would you agree that there is an issue right now as we speak within the SLFP?
There is an issue, but it's not that sharp an issue. I think right now things are smoother. I think that the SLFP is responding to President Sirisena, and President Sirisena is responding to the SLFP. The SLFP is also happy that former President Rajapaksa is with them in Parliament. So it's a kind of a win-win scenario for the SLFP. They've got President Sirisena, who's the president. They are going to have some people in government, and those who don't want to be in government are going to be quite safely in opposition. And they've also got their old hero Mahinda Rajapaksa back with them in Parliament. So it's not looking too bad for the SLFP.
But then, just a couple of days ago, they were accusing Susil Premachand, who's also a prominent member of the party, of succumbing to the executive powers of President Sirisena, and that apparently he's going to be given a ministerial portfolio. That's also a major issue within the party, don't you think?
Well, it may be a little unethical of me to say anything, because I must say, in the interest of transparency, there's a bit of a history here, because my name was put on the UPFA national list. I never wanted to go to Parliament, but they persuaded me, and Admiral Vasanta Karanagoda, and we said, all right, and our names were on the original list. It was on the front page of the Daily Mirror, it was in the political column of the Sunday Times, and then those two names were dropped somehow. And we were told that this was President Sirisena who had cut our names, but I really didn't buy that, because, I've had chats with President Sirisena months ago. I have my own assessment of him, and I didn't really see him chopping my name off the list. So, somewhere along the line, the party bureaucrats who negotiated this national list dropped the ball. And Mr. Premjayant was certainly one. I think he must have been in a tight spot. So I really don't know what role he played. It would have been a complicated situation for him. he's probably getting flack from both sides. It's not a comfortable place to be. I do think perhaps he could have done things a little better. But then again, the Mahinda Rajapaksa camp could also have done things a little better, because they allowed the party bureaucrats to do the negotiations for them. They shouldn't have done that. They should have put some of the four, the alliance people, the Sandhane people, as part of the negotiating team. They didn't. They allowed Mr. Premjant and Mr. Pridarshan Yapa to do the negotiations. And as party bureaucrats, of course, they are limited in their vision and they are subject to many, many pressures.
Prior to the elections, in the run-up to the elections, there were many speculations, media reports, analysis saying that former President Mahinda Rajapaksa is contesting for the elections, and if he does fail to secure a majority and if he does fail to get the post of Prime Minister, it will be the end of his political career. But he has agreed to act in the capacity of in the opposition and be in Parliament. So what is his future in terms of politics in Parliament or further on from there?
Well, I think he's in a better situation now than he was on January 9th, January 10th, when he was defeated and he was just back home with many people visiting him. I think he can save on the tea and food bills at home now because he's back in Parliament. Otherwise, he was out of politics, and he's a political animal. Now he's back in politics, albeit in a lower profile role. So the Bring Back Mahinda project, as it were, partially succeeded. He's back. He's back in Parliament. He's not back as Prime Minister, obviously. He's not even back as leader of the opposition, but he's back in Parliament. I think he's happier than where he was on January 9th and 10th, which is, retirement. He's not Jaya Jawadhan. Jaya was much older, and Jaya could just look after his grandchildren and read his books. But Mahinda Rajapaksa is much younger. He is still several years younger than President Jawadhan was when he first became president. I think that's the comparison. So I think a lot will depend on what happens in the country, Shaheen. Now, I remember two wartime leaders who were displaced after the war. That is Winston Churchill and Charles de Gaulle of France. Winston Churchill lost in 1945, as everybody knows, having led the country splendidly during the war. The country, Britain, had moved on. It wanted something different. But that wasn't the end of the story. He went home, and in 1951, lo and behold, Winston Churchill was back as Minister of Defence and Prime Minister. And he remained Prime Minister till 1955. And in when he came back in 1951 as Prime Minister, he was 76 years old. In 1955, he retired from the post of Prime Minister because of health. Now, did he go back home? He was a painter as well as a brilliant writer. No, he didn't. He stayed as a parliamentarian. And I remember we were in school. We had to write essays when he died in 1964 as a member of Parliament. Now, nobody said, shame on Sir Winston, look, this is the man who was a colossus of the 20th century. Why did he ever make a comeback? And if he resigned from the Prime Ministership, why didn't he just go home? What's he doing as a backbencher? There are people like that who are political animals. They played a role in their country's history. The country also feels more comfortable having them around. That happened after January 9th. There was a sense of shock. Where's Mahinda Rajapaksa, So bring him back. He couldn't come back as PM. Just a 3% gap between the UPFA and the UNP in terms of votes. But he's back in Parliament, and that's where his dad was from 1931. His cousins, George and Lakshman Rajapaksa. Mahinda Rajapaksa started in Parliament in 1970. Now he's back in Parliament. He's got his son back in Parliament too. The young chap, Namal, did very well in Hambantota. So I think Mahinda is happy. I think the people are happy, his supporters. He's back there. It's reassuring. Whether he has a political future will depend on how things go in the country. How did Churchill come back in 51? Because Britain had moved beyond Churchill. He lost. How did he come back? Did British society change? Did he go back? No. What happened was that there was a Cold War, which wasn't there in 1945. And with the Cold War, the pressure from the Soviet Union on Western Europe and the Western camp, the British people felt that the Labour government, the government of the day, was too soft, or would be too soft. They couldn't count on that government. So they thought, well, bring back Winston Churchill. He's the guy who stands for the nation and so on. He was 76 years old when they brought him back in 51. Mahinda Rajapaksa has not come back as PM, but he's made a comeback in, what, 6 months, which is pretty fast. It took Winston Churchill 5 years. Charles de Gaulle, he was, of course, the wartime hero of French resistance. He was the Prime Minister of France after the war ended, and then circumstances changed. He had to go home. And he went home, and he was brought back in 1958. Can you imagine that? So, leaders, political leaders during war times are sometimes returned to office in peacetime, even if there's no, in peacetime, even if there's no war. When the country, and if the country, feels it's under pressure externally and there's some kind of challenge to the sense of the nation, national pride. If under the new government in Sri Lanka there are no such problems, well, perhaps Mahinda Rajapaksa will not have a political afterlife, and this is about it. But if things go wrong, especially externally and in terms of national sentiment, then who knows?
Dr. Jayatilaka, now during the campaigning period for the elections, you and I specifically discussed, will Mahinda Rajapaksa, if he becomes Prime Minister, be able to work with President Sirisena if he's elected as Prime Minister? But clearly that did not happen. Prime Minister Wickremesinghe is Prime Minister, obviously, right now. And so now, in terms of functioning of the Parliament, in terms of reforms, will, as President, as a powerhouse in the UPFA or in the history of the country, as you did mention, and Ranil Wickremesinghe as Prime Minister and President Sirisena, will those three work together in to make certain reforms to the country, or can they?
Well, I hope so. I hope so. We deserve it. But I see certain problems, and I say this not because I'm suspicious, but because I've read it in the newspapers. And I'm not talking about the local newspapers. There was a very important interview carried in the Hindu, which, as you know, is a very respected Indian paper, probably some say the most respected. I would say the Times of India probably still is, but anyway, very respected. And a giant of Indian journalism has come out of retirement to interview Prime Minister Wickremesinghe, and that is N. Ram, who is part of the family that owns the Hindu. He was the editor of the Hindu, and he has interacted with Sri Lankan leaders at least from the days of President J.R. Jayawardena. So, he did this interview with Prime Minister Wickremesinghe. And the first question, and this guy is brilliant, the first question was, what about this new constitution that you say you want? What's that about? And Prime Minister Wickremesinghe says, well, there are two issues. One is to do with the executive presidency, and the other is to do with the powers of the provincial councils. We have to look at the powers, see if more powers can be given. But on the issue of the executive presidency, there are two views. Civil society groups, which are close to us, want the abolition of the executive presidency. The problem is the Sri Lanka Freedom Party does not want the abolition of the executive presidency. And then Prime Minister Wickremesinghe says, my own view, says he, is that when we have a new constitution which gives Parliament much more power than it now has, automatically the executive presidency will get whittled down. Now that's his phrase. Whittled down means, of course, it will get reduced. So, Prime Minister Wickremesinghe is for a new constitution that will whittle down the executive presidency below where it is now under the 19th Amendment. It's something that will go beyond the 19th Amendment. This is on the record. I don't know whether President Sirisena has read it, whether his advisors have pointed it out to him, but they should. Now, President Sirisena has to decide what his future is going to be. Does he wish to comply with a request that has come from the people of Kenya, that he should contest for a second term, a second presidential term? Personally, I don't see it as a bad thing. Mahinda Rajapaksa can't contest according to the 19th Amendment. Who knows? It might not be a bad idea. The second question is, does he want to contest as Prime Minister? Now, in either event, if he wants to keep that option open, if President Sirisena either wants to run for second term, or if he wants to run as the SLFP candidate for the Prime Ministership, then he faces a problem. What if the new constitution has gone through and the presidency has been reduced still further? It's been whittled down, in Prime Minister Wickremesinghe's words. Maithripala Sirisena is going to have to run for the second presidential term as a disempowered president, facing a candidate from the UNP, Ranil Wickremesinghe, who would be a strong Prime Minister. Now, is that something President Sirisena wants to do? Let us say he runs as PM. Again, he would have to step down from a weakened presidency, where he has not been able to consolidate, and run against somebody who's been a strong Prime Minister. Strong, why? One reason is President Sirisena has donated a large number of SLFers to him, otherwise Prime Minister Wickremesinghe would be the head of a minority government. So, Prime Minister Wickremesinghe clearly is committed to a further reduction of the powers of the executive presidency. President Sirisena has to decide whether that's okay by him or whether that's not so okay by him. And that is where I see a problem looming. Personally, as a political scientist, I don't think that we should move beyond the 19th Amendment in further reducing the powers of the executive presidency.
Dr. Jadalika, let's go back to the election results. Now, in former President Mahinda Rajapaksa's campaign, he did say that he has, during the presidential election, he garnered 5.8 million votes, and he said he still has those 5.8 million votes. But in the general election, we saw a drastic drop.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, over 4 million votes he garnered from the Kurunegala district alone. How come? What happened?
Not Kurunegala. I think nationally, his 5.8 dropped to 4 point something. Basically, lost a million votes. The million votes didn't go to the UNP. Right? The UNP more or less maintained its vote. The UPFA vote dropped. So, what does that mean? If it didn't go to the UNP, that means they stayed home. Now, I think one really doesn't have to dispute that, because President Sirisena has already said that to the SLFP delegation that met him. He said, I was responsible for defeating the UPFA, for defeating the SLFP, and he has given his reasons. He has said that in the course of the campaign, some Pradeshia Sabha and Provincial Council speakers had spoken in a very hostile manner about him, threatened impeachment and so on and so forth, and that he got very annoyed at that. And therefore he decided to make this intervention. The intervention, of course, took the form of the televised speech and subsequently the 5-page letter. So, because of President Sirisena's intervention, there was confusion in the ranks of the SLFP voters, some SLFP voters. A large hardcore stayed with Mahinda Rajapaksa. That's the 4.2, as opposed to the UNP's 4. Let's see, I'm getting the figures wrong. I think 44% to 42%. But they didn't vote for the UNP. They were just disappointed. They were confused. They thought, what's the point? Mahinda Rajapaksa is never going to be appointed PM by President Sirisena. So they stayed home. And he lost. lost by 11 seats and by 3%, which is a very narrow loss, attributable to the fact that President Sirisena tripped him up. Now, that's in a way understandable. I don't think it's a nice thing to do, but it's understandable because in the history of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, I recall 1982, when the SLFP candidate Hector Koppakadua was tripped up by Madam Bandaranaike. And in the history of the UNP, I believe that had it not been Mr. Wickremesinghe, had the UNP had another leader, you would have had a UNP president today. Because when the cycle moves, the natural thing is for there to be a UNP president, not an SLF, not a president who crossed over from the Sri Lanka Freedom Party and is now the leader of the SLFP. But you don't have a UNP president, and the UNP under another leadership could probably have done better than 106 seats. But that's the nature of politics. People think in terms of their of the threat they perceive as individuals, as leaders, and then they do whatever they can to reduce that threat or to defeat it. And that's what President Sirisena did. I mean, that's the reality of politics.
The Kurunegala district, for instance, was a stronghold of former President Mahinda Rajapaksa, but that district alone went, a couple of polling divisions, if I might say, went in favor of the United National Party. Again, how did that happen?
Well, Kurunegala was never a stronghold of Mahinda. Mahinda campaigned for 3 days in Kurunegala. Mahinda Rajapaksa is a southerner. He's from the Ruhuna. He and his family have never contested from outside. Throughout his political history, it's been Beliatta. He campaigned in Mulkirigala for his brother Chamal. These are all sons of the Ruhuna. And if you look at the political map, it's very interesting. The blue areas are what I would call the greater Ruhuna. That's, you have Kalutara, Ratnapura, Gaul Matra, Hambantota, and then you have this Anuradhapura Kurunegala over there. That's not the greater Ruhuna, obviously. So Kurunegala was historically a UNP stronghold. I remember the days when Gamini Jayavikrama Pereira was the chief minister of Kurunegala. Kurunegala was UNP. And Mahinda Rajapaksa moved across this time from Hambantota to Kurunegala and campaigned only for a few days because he was all over the country. And in the last few days, he went back to help his son in Hambantota, last 3 days. And yet, look at the preference vote. The UNP wins after 20 years. Colombo is the most populous district in the country. Prime Minister Wickremesinghe gets 500,000 votes, preference votes. The SLFP loses after 20 years. Mahinda Rajapaksa doesn't have state power. He's contesting in Kurunegala where he hasn't contested before. Kurunegala is a populous district but nowhere as populous as Colombo. And he gets 400,000 votes, preference votes. In terms of the island preferences, Ranil at 500,000 plus, number 2 Mahinda Rajapaksa 400,000 plus from an area that he didn't come from. Prasanna Ranatunga 380,000, Vimal Veeravansa 300,000, and so on and so forth. So I think Mahinda Rajapaksa did pretty well under the circumstances.
Dr. Jayatilaka, let's move on to the party's national list candidates. I know, pretty controversial, I suppose. Now, the UPFA, for example, they have suggested a couple of national list nominees. It's rather shocking, I might add, because many of the names were defeated in their districts. So, don't you think, like, whoever has lost their credibility by this move?
Well, I think so. And here I have to praise the UNP and Prime Minister Wickremesinghe. He has not done the same thing. It's shocking because during the campaign, one of the main things that was said was that people should look for new faces of a different quality, a different type of candidate and so on. And now, people who have been clearly rejected by the voters are being brought back into Parliament through the back door of the UPFA national list. And some of them have even been put back into the Sri Lanka Freedom Party decision-making body.
I mean, for example, these
the
names,
Central Committee,
which is Vijay Munizoisa, SP Disanaika,
and the whole lot,
Yeah.
This is the old guard. I thought the whole point of former President Kumaratunga and President Sirisena was that, you know, you should have new faces, not the old guard, not the old war horses, the old SLFP establishment. Well, the voters listened. They virtually wiped out the old SLFP war horses, and they're right back in the stables through the national list. This is a travesty. You know, it's really bad. I thought the whole point was to do with political culture. This is just bad news.
With that being said, what is your stance on Mrs. Rosie Senanaika's loss in the election?
Well, I'm sorry about it, because I thought that with the Poshan Amal, for instance, this program of nutritional food for lactating mothers, she had done a wonderful job as a minister. And I'm quite surprised at what happened, but I can't comment beyond that. I do wish that at least as one exception, that she had been brought back through the national list. Though, I mean, I have praised just now Prime Minister Vikram Singh for not bringing in defeated politicians, but there are always exceptions to rules, and I think Rosie should have been such an exception. That's strange and sad what happened to her.
It's like the cycle you just mentioned earlier.
Yeah, it is, and Rosie should have made it, because she did very well. She did well on television, and most of all, as I said, the program, the nutritional program, was a very good program. She did more than most ministers. She was the deputy minister.
Dr. Jayatilaka, another shocker was the amount of seats the Janata Vimukti Peramuna was able to secure, because they were expecting about 10 seats, but they've
20 to 25.
Yeah, somewhat, but they managed to garner just 6. What is your comment on that?
Well, the JVP under its new leadership started well last year, and then they kind of went crazy. It was like they were on something or without breaks. See, the JVP historically has played one of two roles. Either it has been the kind of the left wing of a national liberation movement or patriotic movement, or it has been an anti-establishment party which equally opposed both the UNP and the SLFP. And when it did its politics right, it reached a high point of 40 members of parliament, in a coalition, of course, with Chandrika in the 2004 election, if I remember. Now it's right down. It made a lot of noise in the last few, last year during the January elections and this year. A lot of noise, but at the end of the day, it looks like they were just used by the UNP or allowed themselves to be used. I mean, these are not babes. When Anura Kumar Dissanayake keeps slamming Mahinda Rajapaksa as this kind of demon, he demonized Rajapaksa, and he just lightly cuffs Mr. Wickramasinghe, then what does the voter feel? Somebody who's watching this, they feel, oh my God, we have to stop Mahinda Rajapaksa. And since Anura is not attacking Ranil Wickramasinghe anywhere that much, they think, okay, you know, let's go vote for Ranil. That's the only way to stop this guy, Mahinda, this demon. So, Anura Kumar Dissanayake dug the JVP's electoral grave for it by forgetting the roots of the JVP, the moorings of the JVP.
But then again, Dr. Jayatilak, if you compare the votes which the TNA received and the JVP has received more votes, but then less seats. That's because of the electorates, the districts are contested.
No, but there are fewer people. The JVP has a huge pool among the Sinhala majority. The TNA only has the votes of the Tamil minority of the North and East. So the TNA has a much greater vote share, enormous vote share. Even Douglas, I mean, look at Douglas Devananda, the EPDP. Remarkable performance. He is the only politician who has retained his seat in Jaffna for 20 years running. I mean, against all odds. He was seen as a collaborator of the Rajapaksa government. The TNA was winning clearly this time. The government in Colombo was a different government, and yet he held on. He didn't have state power. And Jaffna is a place where Tamil nationalism is strongest. So what that shows is, if you know what your market is, what society expects of you, and you remain on message, you're rewarded. The JVP lost its way under Anwar Kumar, not initially. Initially, that's last year when he took over as party leader, he was doing well. But with the southern province election, I remember at one point he said something about Mahinda Rajapaksa's health. And, you can't run for election in the south, and you can't be a party from the deep south and attack Mahinda Rajapaksa in personal terms and expect to get votes. People, if those who listen to you agree with you, then they go vote UNP. They don't have to vote for the JVP. So the JVP has really taken a nosedive, and it will have to rethink its course. It will have to do better. I mean, perhaps somebody like Vijita Herat, who's done well in Gampaha, might be the person who would have to take over in order to put the party back on track. Because if they go on this way, they are going to lose the golden opportunity they have at the upcoming Pradeshia Sabha election in November.
Now again with the JVP nomination, national list, I beg your pardon, Sunil Handunatti.
There's a problem there, isn't there? I mean, Krishmal, Varuna, Surya.
Yes. Sunil Handunatti lost in the preferential votes, but he has been brought through the national list. Do you agree with this?
Well, as I said, every rule has an exception. As a rule, I don't agree with it. But Sunil Handunatti is an exceptional politician. He is from Mathura, but he was sent to Mathura only a few months before the election. And that's not really fair, because the man has to be given a chance to rebuild his apparatus in that area. Of course, as I said, Mahinda Rajapaksa went over to Kurunagala and got 400,000 preference votes, but, two different people. So I think it's a good thing that Sunil Handunatti should be back in Parliament. Though as a rule, it's not a good thing. But I said the same thing about Rosie. I wish Rosie were back in Parliament.
But then again, does the party lose its credibility it has?
The credibility of the party has been damaged not by Sunil Handunatti's defeat,
or making matters worse,
or bringing him back into Parliament. No, they handled that Krishmal Varuna Surya thing a little badly. Perhaps they should never have had him on the national list. But if they did have him on the national list, then they shouldn't have treated him in this way, because he's now written an open letter and criticized the JVP. So the JVP tried to remake itself. It's a good thing to try to remake yourself, but they went too far in one direction, and they were indistinguishable from the UNP, or rather the UNF. Because once the UNP changed, it got these allies around it, then the new JVP and the new UNF were virtually indistinguishable. It's as if the JVP were part of that, since Mr. Anwar Kumar Dissanayake was in the so-called National Executive Committee together with Mr. Wickremesinghe and former President Kumaratunga and so on. So for the voter, this wasn't somebody who was anti-UNP and anti-SLFP. This was somebody who was para-UNP, and then why waste a vote? Might as well vote for the UNP.
Let's talk about the MOU which SLFP and the UNP have signed. What is your view on that?
Well, on the face of it, the MOU looks a good document. There are quite a few paragraphs taken from the UPFA election manifesto, guarantee for the future. There are whole sections taken from that. That's not a bad thing. After all, it's an MOU between two parties. But I'm a little puzzled about something that's way up in that MOU. It's under the section freedom. It talks about a new constitution and a constituent assembly to draft a new constitution for the purpose of making the regions more even and of reconciliation between ethnic and religious communities in Sri Lanka, and helping create a Sri Lankan identity and so on and so forth. Now, I think all that is good, but I wonder why you need a new constitution for it. There are many things that can be done either within the existing constitution or through amendments to the existing constitution. You can implement the LLRC report within a compressed time frame. You can have new legislation, new laws to eliminate all forms of discrimination. There's a UN charter against discrimination, racial and other forms of discrimination. We have signed up to it, but we don't have the enabling legislation to actually make that part of our law. We could have done that. We can appoint new bodies like the Race Relations Board of Great Britain, a kind of national harmony or national integration boards. There's lots that can be done. We could even move an amendment like the 19th Amendment. But why do you need a brand new constitution to facilitate reconciliation between communities? What is it that the old constitution can't do and that you can't do with an amendment to the old constitution? I'm a little worried about that.
Doctor, now this agreement is valid for just 2 to 2.5 years.
Yeah.
What happens after 2.5 years?
Well, it will depend on how the 2.5 years
Is there going to be
2 years?
2 years, sorry. Is there going to be chaos again? Do you believe there will be chaos?
No. I think there will be recomposition, not chaos. Because Mr. Wickremesinghe has this habit, whenever he's been PM, it has a shelf life, it is a very short shelf life. So, I'm not sure that unless he changes, that he's going to last the 4.5 years that you need before a new election. If you take what's happening on the ground now, the FCID stuff is back. Gotabaya Rajapaksa has been taken to the FCID, grilled for, or some other commission, and grilled for 6 hours. I mean, this is ridiculous. This is a guy who is regarded as a hero. They should just leave these guys alone and get on with the task of running the government. The more you provoke the Rajapaksas, the more they get involved in politics. You just shouldn't do that. That's what was done in the first 100 days. And it triggered a cycle of political activism and radicalization. That should be the past. If you're talking about reconciliation, if you're talking about moving forward, you're talking about a government of consensus, you do not harass officials, especially respected officials, of a wartime administration, of the previous. You put that past you. Mahinda Rajapaksa is in parliament, just let him be. Don't go for his family. Because this man is a fighter. The family are political fighters. I mean, look at little young Nama. He did so well. 127,000 preference votes. Who thought he could do that? No governmental power. No daddy running in the campaign. Just him against a very strong UNP candidate, challenger, Mr. Sajid Premadasa, who was in power. But Nama did well. So, what the UNP's behavior in the last few days shows me is that they haven't learned a thing from the mistakes of the first 180 days. Now, if the UNP goes along that route, you're going to have a replay of the 180 days, where the national government broke down, the SLFP fellows started coming back, because there was a groundswell, anti-UNP groundswell. So, if Mr. Wickremesinghe proceeds pragmatically, realistically, building consensus, respecting the wishes of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, and moving gradualistically, he will do well, and the country will do well. But if he forgets that the real public support he has is that of a minority government, that he didn't get a majority, and that the real public support the SLFP has is that of the largest opposition in the history of the Sri Lankan Parliament, if he remembers that, he's okay. If he forgets that, and he just goes by these SLFP MPs who have been loaned to him by President Sirisena, and he thinks that he's got a near 2/3 majority and he can do anything he wants, then there's going to be trouble. Now, in the interview, the Hindu interview, which I told you about, in Ram, the last question is also very important. The last question is, what are you going to do about the land bridge linking India and Sri Lanka? And Mr. Wickremesinghe says, well, first we have to get the country moving again before we look into those things. Now, the fact that so senior and respected a journalist such as NRAM, ask that as the last question means that that's a serious issue, or is something that India is very serious about. Now, Mr. Wickremesinghe should have said, look, that's far too important a matter for me to make any decision about. It's to do with the country as a whole. We'll have to go for a referendum. We can't just link our island with some other country. I mean, and people can go to courts about this. He should have given a clear answer. But what that shows is that he's entertaining the idea. He just doesn't want to comment on it at this moment. Now, if he goes for big ticket items like that, very controversial stuff, changing the whole constitution, moving beyond the parameters of the 13th Amendment and the unitary state, having a supposedly domestic mechanism to inquire into war crimes allegations, but with international involvement, because we remember our experience with international involvement with Norway and Erik Solheim. It was a very bad one. Then you will find rumblings. You will find the SLFP beginning to criticize it, and President Sirisena will also have to rebalance, especially if the new constitution tries to whittle down, to use Prime Minister Wickremesinghe's phrase, the powers of the executive presidency. So I think that mid-term, after the 2 years, you will have not an election, because you can't have an election for 4.5 years. You may have a recomposition of the government where you have an SLFP administration under President Sirisena with a UNP component, because this happened in 2001-2004. The parliamentary balance shifted in favor of the UNP at one time, and then the parliamentary balance shifted in favor against UNP and in favor of the SLFP at another time. So these things change. When you have only an 11-seat majority, the traffic can flow both ways. It all depends on how you behave. So I expect a recomposition of the government and a change in the balance of power in Parliament. And I'm not talking about Mahinda Rajapaksa making a comeback. I'm really talking about President Sirisena as a player. But President Sirisena will also have to have some kind of rapprochement with Mahinda Rajapaksa and his faction in the SLFP if he's going to save himself from the UNP's new constitution, which will virtually decapitate him. So it's an interesting time. It's to do with 4 power centers: Ranil Wickremesinghe, Maithripala Sirisena, Mahinda Rajapaksa, and the TNA. Never forget the TNA. So you're going to have an interaction between these 4 power centers. I see it rather like these merry-go-rounds with the rocking horses or the cars moving up and down while the merry-go-round also goes around. So that's the nature of politics that I see post-election. It's no longer a clash, a frontal clash of political armies.
Dr. Jathilavel, let's go way back to one of our early discussions during this interview in terms of the SLFP. There are reports, rumors, that Mahinda Rajapaksa has proposed Kumaravelgame as the opposition leader. Now, number one, is this true? And if so, would it cause further problems within the SLFP as it is right now?
I haven't heard about this. I don't know. What I do know is that 65, I believe, MPs met at former Chief Minister Prasanna Rantunga's house and urged a reluctant former President Mahinda Rajapaksa to become the leader of the opposition. Now, I mean, I don't think he refused flatly, but he was very, very reluctant. But I don't know anything beyond that. I don't know whether those numbers still hold. Maybe now that President Sirisena has taken a conciliatory stand. When he threatened them with disciplinary action, there were 65 who were with Mahinda. But now that he's talking in a far more conciliatory, friendly way and saying, okay, you guys, those who want to go can join the government, those who want to can stay in opposition, things are mellowed. And frankly, I think there are more people who are talking to President Sirisena now, and probably it's kind of 50-50, the two tendencies in the SLFP. But I don't know about this naming of Kumaravelgame.
Okay, Dr. Jadrikal, let's move away from politics for a brief moment. Early this week, we saw one of our cricketers, Lankan cricketers, considered a national and international hero, Kumar Sangakkara, retire from the game. Yes, that was a rather emotional moment. Personally, what do you think about Mr. Kumar Sangakkara as a person and a player?
Well, I think he's a wonderful, wonderful guy. Obviously, I don't need to talk about his cricketing prowess. That's well known and acknowledged internationally. The ratings show that. But I was very impressed, and I'm not easily impressed, with his Colin Cowdrey lecture a few years ago. My wife and I have had the pleasure of spending some time with Kumar and his wife, Yehali. We find them a lovely couple. They are very civilized, very polite, very sophisticated while having their feet on the ground, which is not easy. And I think that Kumar Sangakkara and his wife epitomize what Sri Lanka can be, what it is to be Sri Lankan. It's explicit in his Colin Cowdrey speech. This is a guy whom I think he should someday he should enter politics.
With that being said, President Sirisena at the presentation ceremony openly offered Kumar Sangakkara the Sri Lankan position of Sri Lankan High Commissioner to UK. Do you think he should take it?
I think President Sirisena did exactly the right thing. I can't think of a better High Commissioner for Sri Lanka in London than Kumar Sangakkara. I fervently hope he accepts it. I think he'll do brilliantly if he does so. I think that he should be Sri Lanka's foreign minister someday. And this would be a very good entry point for that. Well, I wish him luck. I think he's a wonderful chap.
So do you believe
I'm very proud of him as a Sri Lankan. I'm very proud of him.
Is he like one of those one-of-a-kind men who will be born from Sri Lanka?
No, we keep producing brilliant individual talents. Kumar Sangakkara is one of them. He's quite distinctive, but he's not just one. He's one of a kind, but there are others who will come up.
Just came to mind actually. At his presentation ceremony speech, he did make he gave some good advice to current captain Angelo Matthews. He said, "Don't be afraid to lose when searching for a win." Now, I find that's a quote rather brilliant. Do you believe that that very statement could be used by some of our politicians rather? Don't be afraid to lose when searching for a win.
Well, I mean, I practice it myself. I supported Mahinda Rajapaksa in the January 8th and August 17th campaigns, and I strove to help him win. But that was while knowing that one could lose. It's just that you have to play the game as best as you can. And that is the philosophy of cricket, isn't it? And play up and play the game. So I think Kumar rephrased it and said exactly the right thing. You need the courage of your conviction, then you have to try your very best. That's the important thing. Your conscience must know, whether it's cricket or politics, that you have tried your very best, you have given your very best. And in politics especially, and this is a lesson I learned from my study of Fidel Castro, which is what I did my doctorate on, that just because you lose, it doesn't mean you are wrong. Many good causes lose, but that doesn't mean they were the wrong causes.
But not all the time, does it?
Not all the time. I mean, if you keep on losing all the time, then especially in politics, then you've got something wrong. But if you're talking about Mahinda Rajapaksa, I mean, he's had a fantastic trajectory. When history is written, Jonas Salk, the inventor of the polio vaccine, said, "Genius is the ability to see the future retrospectively." So, if what will be written about Mahinda Rajapaksa in Sri Lanka's history is something that will not be written about any other leader, certainly in our lifetime. And I can't remember the last person who would have that kind of niche in our history. He doesn't have to do anything else. And that can't be said about any other living politician today. And if he is no longer with us, I think the outpouring of popular sentiment will be such that it's nothing that any living politician in this country can aspire to. Mahinda Rajapaksa can be quite happy with what he has done. And I'm quite proud to have supported him from 2000 and from the first DA Rajapaksa lecture I gave in 2003. And in all the three presidential election campaigns, 2005, 2010, 2015, which he lost, and August 17th, I'm quite proud of having supported him when he won and when he lost.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Rajathalika. It's been an absolute pleasure having you once again. Well, that's all the time we have for tonight. As I mentioned before, it was a rather interesting 3 to 4 months. We had an election. Cricketing great Kumar Sangar retired from the game. Until we meet next time, I am Shan Jurampati. Thank you very much, Dr. Rajathalika, for joining us.
Thanks, Ryan.
Good night.
Thank you.
Take care.